I'm here with Upland Sandy.
Hello.
Just briefly tell us a little bit who you are and how you got interested into politics and government.
Yeah, well, I always came from a political family, but it was around the 2016 election where I kind of thought about things a little differently. It's not as much about the blue team versus the red team when one guy, Bernie Sanders, is out there exposing how the healthcare industry is just kind of parasitic and we're just shoveling money into middlemen. And then a Democrat like Hillary Clinton defends that system. Oh, and it happens that she's bribed by the very people that are profiting from it. So at that moment, I really realized that politics is a lot more of a complicated information war, and that it should be about the 1% versus the 99%. And so, probably sometime around the 2024 election, and I know a lot of people that generally are more on the left were just super defeated and super down about things. I was like, man, like there's nothing else to do but try and want advocate for the kinds of things you want to see in the world. And Kamala Harris and the Democrats are not that. That was not a defeat of the direction we want to take the world. It was a defeat of this corporate class that we want to defeat in the first place. And so started making videos, and then people started reaching out to me in the DMs, and now we're here.
To like me.
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously, let's just get started with a fun one. Mamdani won last year. In a lot of ways, okay, some people who are Republican would be like, oh, he was far out there on some things. He, supports Medicare for all, supports things that are like Bernie Sanders, socialist. But in other ways, a lot of Trump voters, some Trump voters and the Bronx and the Queens had voted for him because he said things like, I want to lower your cost, which, if you remember, go back to 2024, what the Trump run on. No new wars. He ran on lowering the cost because there was inflation after COVID with
Hmm.
President Biden, and especially the world economic situation at
Yeah,
that
yeah,
point.
yeah.
And he ran on some other things like, uh, on some social issues as well.
But like no tax on tips, right? That's what jumps out to me, among other things from the 24
And
campaign.
a lot of liberals even support that. And so Mamdani, obviously, in a way, and also this is a big one that, and I want to get your take on this. Why do I think Trump and Mamdani are getting along when they meet? Well, Mamdani started out at 1 or 2%. At Eric Adams was in trouble, but you had people like Brad Lander, who was the city comptroller, if I'm correct. People that were like at 15, 16%, with Mamdani, this state assemblyman, was at 2 or 3%. Well, guess who else in a presidential primary about a decade earlier had that? Trump. He was at 1 or 2%. And there's people like Ted Cruz or John Kasich or Marco Rubio that were promised to win. So when you look at it this way, both of them have some far values on either end of the spectrum, but they both were underdogs and they both won and they were not talked about from day one like other candidates. So I
Hmm.
think maybe that's why they get along. But my question for you is, do you think that the Mamdani style is the future of the Democratic Party? Or do you think we need to go to somebody like Rahm Emanuel, more Barack Obama, more Bill and Hillary Clinton? What's your thought?
Yeah, 1,000,000% the Mamdani route. And that's not to say that Mamdani's campaign down to every detail needs to be exported into like rural Arkansas. But you take the skeleton of his campaign. It's don't, have some humility. Go out to a place like Fordham Road in the Bronx, where you know Trump won with these working class, minority voters, and be willing to take their answers for what they are, and then incorporate that into an anti-system vibe. I think more than anything, in what you just said about those sort of parallels between Trump and Mamdani, is that they both ran as anti-system candidates. The system did not want them in there. They did not ascend to that position, or close to power by the traditional means. They didn't get the nice internship in the place and then get hired into an office and then go to a think tank and then get hired elsewhere. They said, I think I see where people's passion is, and I'm going to speak to that. And so I think that is the skeleton of the campaign that has to get run everywhere, including Indiana, including Maine, with people like Graham Plattner, um,
Dan Osborne in
Dan
Nebraska.
Osborne in Nebraska. And you know what? If you need to go independent, because the two parties suck. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, if you're running in the Democratic Party, it's because it, like the Republican Party, is just a vehicle for change and a vehicle for power. And if the institutions are set up so that the two parties kind of work together to push everybody else out of the conversation, if you need to use the Democratic Party or the Republican Party as your vehicle to do that, then so be it. But if you have the ability and the name recognition and the passion behind you, and you can do it as an independent, please, by all means. And I'll even shout him out here in Indiana. I know we're on to national politics, but there's a guy running in Bedford, Sean Steele, might be District 65 if I'm not mistaken. He's running as an independent. Now, there's no Democrat in the race, but he comes from a line of previous state legislators in his family, and that's the kind of model that I think needs to happen all over the country.
100%. And something that I kind of notice is I feel like there's almost a lot on a national scale, but also even on a state scale, if you look at specific state legislators and assemblies across the country. But there's like a bipartisan thing when it comes to like releasing the Epstein files, where we saw Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey. They definitely disagree on maybe some social issues. But when it came to that, they got the votes, and they passed it, and that was a big bipartisan
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So I guess where do you kind of see a good bipartisan thing coming? Do you think it's on maybe Medicare? Do you think it's on foreign affairs? What's maybe the next bipartisan thing you could see people coming together on in Congress or just the voters even?
Yeah, I think the voters is an interesting question.
High medical bills?
Yeah, I think it's going to be AI and data centers because as best as we can forecast, and it's always hard to know with the technology that only a few people really have a complete understanding of, and the understanding that we have in the public sphere is really kind of shaped by the only people who really know what's going on have an interest in having the market feel like it's going to be the next big thing, like it's going to replace all of our jobs, and that it's going to make labor costs go to zero and everything is going to be more efficient. And when that happens, when your labor and your ability to go to work and earn a wage is no longer valuable, if you don't own any assets, which is already kind of the case in this economy, if you don't own any assets, you're kind of up the creek.
If you're under 35, it's very big.
Yes, yes. But if on top of that, I can't go into the trades, now, I mean, that'll be probably one of the last things, but to go. But we've told kids, we're here on Purdue University's campus. We've told kids, go to college. If you need to take that loan, do it. Go into a space where you can make a good living and you can be a consultant. You can work on spreadsheets. You can go help a business. And then those businesses aren't hiring as much right now. And if the direction goes, there's like, if the trend line continues, there's going to be a complete upheaval of the social contract in the US. And anybody who is interested in politics, if you're the most cynical person with no ideology and you just want power and you just want to get elected, you're going to recognize that and see that there is a massive, massive lane for you into saying we need a complete rewriting of how we do things. Are we going to nationalize AI? That's probably hard to imagine that happening, but you can't just have Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg owning basically the entire economy into their hands. And I don't, there's 350 million of us and like 1,000 of them. I think as the situation gets more and more dire, that's going to be where I think if there's going to be one central flashpoint that we can point to where we say, oh, this is where the left and the right came together, that's going to be it.
And I also think medical debt.
For sure, for sure.
Um, Something else, and this one's kind of big right now, and I don't want to lean on any one country too much in this because let's just be real, there's a lot of conflicts going on, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, America, and Iran. There's still some stuff with, Hezbollah and Israel. It looks like most of the Hamas and Gaza thing, and Israel, there's a ceasefire there that's kind of been working. But do you think we should be sending foreign aid to any countries?
That's a great question. I think that
I named all of them so no one knows which one I'm specifically maybe
yeah.
calling out.
Well, no, I think not another dime and not another bomb to Israel. But I think over time too, I've actually heard a lot of the points made by the right, and I think I've come a little bit on that when they talk about foreign aid in general. When USAID was one of the first things cut by Doge.
I
Um,
forgot about those.
yeah. Everything moves a mile.
Where's the ballroom that is Doge gonna cut that?
Oh no, that's paid for by the Hard Rock Cafe and the AI billionaires. It's
Oh,
not. Don't worry about
even
that.
though they have no real money, it's all in the stock market.
Yes, yeah, the Fed just adds a zero every time they need it. But I think that how do I want to put it? USAID plays a dual function. It quite literally saves lives with malaria, drugs, and mosquito nets, and all these sort of things in Africa and all around the world that make a very tangible, positive impact in the lives of many people. But two other things are true is that the reason why the country is in that state where they need help is because it is very profitable to American companies. They need children to go dig that cobalt out of the ground to go into my iPhone. Apple needs that to be as cheap as possible.
Tesla.
Exactly. And having child labor and people breathing in toxic fumes and living in like plywood huts and they need mosquito nets and are dying of malaria and AIDS, like that is an unfortunately necessary byproduct of the way that our kind of global domination of supply chains is set up. And the second thing is that if the government in Kenya, or I guess a lot of cobalt mining happens in the Democratic Republic of Congo, if the Congo said, hey, we want to nationalize our cobalt mines and say that the profits of cobalt in the DRC are for the DRC, those malaria nets would stop, right? It's a massive piece of leverage and soft power over the developing world to make sure that all of these countries stay corrupt and compliant with the US. And so, you get a lot of liberals or the Democratic Party. I wouldn't call myself a liberal in that sense that quite predictably, and I think this was kind of the point from the Trump administration, get super outraged. Like they get up in arms. I can't believe that you're cutting USAID. You're killing all these babies in Africa, and that's like a true thing that is outrageous. But now they're stuck there, like defending what is essentially like the offspring of the CIA. And is a tool for American soft power around the world. And so on that question of like foreign aid for these other countries, I think that falls into a really broader question about where I think American power and American empire is going. And I think probably our constant shelling out. I mean, the biggest number one recipient in the world of foreign aid is Egypt, because we need that Suez Canal to stay open under, American rules, and we need to make sure that they aren't attacking Israel. And so they are the number one, recipient of our foreign aid, and their government is so corrupt. But we don't care. We don't care about a military dictatorship. We don't care about a corrupt.
But we care about Venezuela because of oil.
Yeah, yes, and we
And
also
by the way,
care.
there's more drug labs probably in Indiana, the meth capital of the world is almost our state, than there is in like half of those southern countries. Yes, they're making drugs there, but like
Um,
narco terrorism is what they were going after Maduro for. Look at what the CIA did in Arkansas in the 70s, or what's going on in Indiana.
Paul. And don't forget, we need to liberate the women and girls of Iran. They're
Yeah,
just yearning to wear blue jeans and listen to rap music. So we need to bomb them until they're free.
definitely. No, 100% on that. But anyways, yeah, I just think with the foreign aid, I think at some point it's like, okay, if my biggest threat is not between Lebanon and Israel.
No.
I'm sure between those two nations, there are things going on and there's bad and good people on both sides. But you know what my concern is? My concern is making sure that my school has Wi-Fi that works and that with public funds, we're making that happen. My
Mm,
concern is that in 20 years, I'll be employed in America.
yeah.
My border isn't 7,000 miles away or 5,000 miles away
And
like
and
that.
remember, every bomb in Gaza, virtually every bomb in Gaza, or that little boy that was just orphaned in the southern Lebanon when Israel completely flattened their village. That boy's going to remember seeing "Made in the USA" on that bomb drop. And we think about how you get to 9/11. You think about what happens with ISIS. It's when we destabilize the Syrian government. Uh,
Wait a second, ISIS hasn't attacked Israel.
Right. And don't forget that Iran was key in fighting back against ISIS back in 2014. They are Shia Muslim. A lot of what we would call in that previous era radical Islamic terrorism came from a certain Sunni perspective. And I'm not any kind of scholar in that, but it's my understanding that Iran was deep geopolitical allies or enemies with Al Qaeda, with ISIS, and people like that. And so it's a very complicated situation, but it's really quite simple. We don't get much out of this at all, but the large multinational corporations and politicians that are bribed by foreign governments think that there's a lot in this for them, and they're going to use our resources to do it. It's got to stop.
100%, 100%. Um, and something else I want to talk about because we've now covered, well, the rise of, I guess, Mamdani, which, by the way, can go back to people on both sides running it up the middle, doing the same old stuff as inflation goes up, especially on Mamdani's economic ideas. So do I agree with all of them? No. I perhaps some differences there. But last I checked, what did Ronald Reagan do 40 years ago that really helped where I'm at today? What did even Bill Clinton do? So really neither side from an economic standpoint had lifelong thing besides helping out the baby boomers, and that's just a fact.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you about obviously you're passionate, I know, about public transport in a way like that. Indiana and some Midwest states haven't done as well. Do you think that in America we could ever have maybe better public transportation or high-speed rails between states or do more things like that besides Amtrak?
Yeah, I think that what would be very helpful is a strong federal government push because we are a very large country and we have 50 separate state governments. I'm really open to the idea of, let giving state governments a long leash and how exactly they want to build these channels and corridors. But obviously, this is a massive investment. And when you are so sort of built up for roads and highways and all of that, those are very costly to maintain. And it's a hard ask to come up with more money to make in new investments when you can't fill a pothole in Indianapolis, and I'm sure there's a pothole problem here. So I think a lot of federal money and a lot of federal incentives could go a really long way in building that out. But I think the opportunity that that would provide us would be absolutely amazing. But it takes it's not because it's bad policy, right? There's car companies, there's oil companies, there's the people that pave all of these roads, those contractors that are involved. Everybody's
Lobbyist?
yeah, and well that's who they hire to make sure that they know, hey man, come campaign season, we've got our donations and we've bought both the Republicans and the Democrats. And so if you don't do our bidding, we're just going to take that money we gave you and double it to the other guy. It's what they do in every industry, and so it's going to take kind of a mass grassroots movement in order to get that ball rolling.
100%. And it would also, I think, create quite a bit of jobs with AI
Oh,
still.
oh my God! It's a huge federal jobs program, almost akin to the New Deal. And think about how much sort of ground we've given to the Europeans and to the Chinese. People talk about that on green technology, but you don't need to limit it there. But like the solar panels that are coming out of China are so much more efficient and so much cheaper, obviously because of purchasing power parity and difference in currencies and things like that. But also they've just got it down to a science. They know how to make it cheaper because they're doing it at scale and they've got a really competitive scene of private enterprise that ultimately answer to whatever the CCP is going to tell them to do, but they're incentivized to compete against each other using the wonders of the market or whatever to innovate really well, and we're getting completely blown out of the water. And so it would be very nice to have competitive American rail manufacturing. I was coming back. My brother was living in Chicago for a little bit, and I went and visited him. And on the way back, I stopped by in Pullman, Chicago, or Pullman, Illinois, right outside. I think it's in Chicago technically. Eugene Debs, Hoosier hero, instigated the Pullman strike there, in I think the late 1800s. Pinkertons came up. Bosses will always hire a private army to make sure that workers don't get too uppity. But I think Pullman was where dreams were made. It was where people could make a decent living, send their kids to, not send them to school necessarily at that time, but just give them a good middle class life. And those kids were the ones who were parents in the 40s, 50s, 60s, when we kind of romanticized this golden age of what it was like to be a middle class American. And that came from having these good domestic union manufacturing jobs. And the public transit and that investment is a huge boon in manufacturing. But even if we're in a service economy and the manufacturing golden era is past us by, there's no reason why an Uber driver should be living paycheck to paycheck. Why can't I be a full-time server at a restaurant if I want to? I might have to pay a little bit more for that, right? But if that money is staying in the community because that person has a better ability to spend, maybe they're starting small businesses now that they're getting paid more. When we keep that money here and we're not just constantly worried about consumption at the most convenient and cheapest way possible, it really does a lot to restore kind of the heart of our communities that we've seen gutted over the last like 60 to 80 years.
Totally. And I always like to kind of end when I do interviews with fireball questions, where maybe don't go as much into detail as we did on some topics. But first fireball question, who's one Democratic candidate you do not want to win the nomination?
Gavin Newsom. Slime ball, he will do whatever he thinks it takes. He'll say no APAC money one moment, and then the next moment he'll say, "What do you mean? I've never even heard of APAC." Whenever the audience has changed, maybe it's a little better that the guy doesn't actually have a conviction that I hate, but I need somebody with conviction. Even if I don't agree with the conviction, I can respect having principles. That man does not have principles.
Wow. Second one, fireball question. Um, who is one person that you think is the future of a Democratic Party? And maybe not even on a presidential level. It could be somebody winning a Senate election, a House seat, but somebody who maybe signifies it a different way, or somebody that has already won.
Graham Plattner is my answer. Graham Plattner is the wave. Oh man, how do I keep it short? Graham Plattner is the perfect example of standing on business. And when they pull out all the stuff from your past, your tattoo, what did you say on Reddit, when they dox you, when they pull out all the stops and try to smear you, you don't waver, you don't back down, you double down. And the kind of freedom that gives him when he doesn't rely on any institutional wealthy interest in order to get his power, that man talks like Martin Luther King. That man talks like JFK. He talks in a way that gives me goosebumps and makes me want to go to war. And so you can do it in Maine. I think you can do it in Indiana. And the skeleton of his sort of project is what Mamdani did. But it's easy to say that that wins in New York. Winning in Maine with the same skeleton kind of proves that working nationwide.
Totally. And then my last fireball question is, and it's a two-part one. What state do you think will flip Republican? Maybe not in 2028, but in 2032 on the presidential level. And what state do you think will flip Democratic finally? That's not necessarily a battleground state like Michigan or Pennsylvania, but a flip that we could see in the next decade.
Oh, that's a great question.
One for each party. I wish we could say that the Libertarian Party is going to win a state or something, or the Green Party, but we'll just focus on these two.
I think Texas is trending more and more professional. Austin is blowing up. Dallas is blowing up. And the kind of people who are moving there, even if they weren't coming from liberal places, which they are, it's just kind of the lifestyle of entering the corporate world, having a desk job, going into suburbia. I think more and more is trending Democrat. And so maybe not in 2026 or 2028, but I think Texas just becoming such a big metropolitan state is going to probably, at least under our current rules and how we imagine the parties, is probably going to flip blue. I don't see Florida going anywhere. I think it's staying red, but that's not really a flip.
Any
Um,
red state flipping to blue?
uh,
You're probably much more interested in maybe which Democratic one might flip.
well, yeah, I think Texas is blue, but like, I've never really staked my flag on that because that's kind of, I think that's more of a product of natural causes rather than people putting in work to make it happen. But what might turn red? Um, Ooh, that's a great one. It also really depends on what direction the parties go. Somewhere like Pennsylvania, you could get the blue wall back, I think, if somebody like Graham Plattner was at the top of the ticket. But if they keep going in the Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, Joe
John
Biden
Featherman.
direction, yeah. I think that Pennsylvania is a place that we could keep seeing blue. If things trended, I'll say in the same scenario, if you see a blue Texas, you see a red Pennsylvania. And I don't mean like I know it's already went Trump in 2024, but like I think we might think of it as a red state if the Democrats continue to be corporate, continue to stake their flag in social issues, and the Republican Party continues to kind of throw meaningless but still like noticeable like bones to people to say no tax on tips, to say oh my God, the government's so corrupt, then they'll do nothing about it. But as long as the Democrats are staying in this kind of corporate smug looking down on you lane, you're gonna see Pennsylvania probably turn red. That'd be my guess.
Fair. I'm with you on Texas for turning blue, but I think Minnesota down the road or
Oh.
New Mexico could turn red. But also, I think it just all depends. If you have like a Democrat who comes in like Biden and does nothing, you could see other things go. If if Trump keeps going down the lane that he starts going down, or Vance were to, you could see other states flip blue more than
Can I
normal.
ask you why you think New Mexico might go?
Yeah, I think first off, they have a large Hispanic population and they're very much faith and family oriented. And from an aspect of like pro-life and stuff, I feel like down the road, they're still very far right in the nature and the way that they think like that. So
Mhm.
that's my reason for New Mexico.
Yeah, that's sound. That's sound. I know that the Latino vote has kind of been in flux over the last, since the Trump era started. And so I think I see your vision there, but like I was saying before, I think if the Democrats can act in a way that will like make that Latino vote realize, oh, these are the anti-system people. I feel like a lot of those swings we saw in the Latino population were them going, things are not working right now. Who is actually arguing for change? And Kamala Harris said, I'm Joe Biden, but a black woman. And Trump said, everything's wrecked. Let me fix it. And so if the Democrats can make people think that, I feel like that might kind of override those sort of cultural things. But I think you're right on the cultural things. The Hispanic population can tend to have more like,
Catholic, yeah,
conservative persuasions. But I think it's a lot of, I tend to put a lot more focus on economic things in general. And I feel like that has a larger sort of way in people's voting habits. But I think you're totally right. And the same is true with the black population. There's a lot more conservatism than most people generally think.
for sure. Well, I appreciate you doing this, Upland Sandy. Where can people go out to find more about you?
Yeah, so I'm at Upland Sandy on every single platform conceivable, I think, except Blue Sky. I'm not on Blue Sky.
Good.
Yeah, that's YouTube, X, TikTok, Instagram, probably Threads because I'm already on Facebook and already on Instagram. And I'll right now it's all sort of the same videos, but I'm really hoping to put a little bit more effort and production to actually kind of doing a show of my own pretty soon. And that'll probably live mostly on YouTube, but we'll see where else it can go.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for coming up to Purdue today.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Boiler up. You can say go Hoosiers.
Yeah, go Hoosiers. We'll have to have you come down to B-Town
Yeah.
sometime soon.
I'll say go Pacers.
Yeah, we can
You got
agree on go
that.
Pacers. There we
And
go.
go Colts.
Yeah. Hey, and you're from Ohio originally, right?
Yep.
Can I get a go Sherrod Brown?
Ooh, someone in my family had once worked on Sherrod Brown's campaign, but here's what I can get for you. I can say Ohio needs to dump the data centers like Indiana.
Yeah, there we go. We can
And on that,
go right there. All right. Thank you so
appreciate it.
much, Jacob.
My pleasure.